may know that the U.S. getting involved with Cuba is nothing new, but do you know how far back it goes? By the 1890s, U.S. investors had poured millions into Cuban sugar, tobacco, and iron mines, and they were absolutely terrified by the Cuban revolt against Spain. Cuba fought Spain for 30 years before the U.S. ever stepped in. By 1898, Cuban rebels were winning, and American newspapers and politicians saw an angle to frame their conflict as our noble mission. Welcome to the Spanish-American War. By the time the U.S. stepped in, Cuban rebels had bled for their own independence, and as Cuba made progress, American investors started staring at the island like a balance machine. Sugar, tobacco, iron mines, railroads, ports, millions of dollars in U.S. money were already tied up in Cuba. And Spain's brutal war to crush the Cuban revolt threatened something more valuable than human life: U.S. corporate profits. So the U.S. propaganda machine went to work to frame the war as liberation. Newspapers gave America a moral crusade, politicians framed the war as patriotism, and the working class got the oldest job in the empire: go die for someone else's investment. And when Spain lost, Cuba did not win their freedom. After the war, the United States occupied the island. Washington then forced Cuba to accept the Platt Amendment, which gave the U.S. the right to intervene in Cuban affairs, restrict Cuban treaties, and lease land for naval bases. This is how Guantanamo Bay became American land in everything but name. And once the legal control was in place, the money followed. American corporations expanded into Cuban sugar, railroads, utilities, banking, mining, and infrastructure. Land moved into the hands of foreign investors. Cuban farmers were pushed aside, while the island was reorganized around export profits. The war had not opened Cuba to democracy. It opened it for business. And this became the pattern. The U.S. framed intervention as rescue, then built control into the paperwork, talked about freedom, then handed the economy to banks, sugar barons, railroad companies, and military planners. The U.S. told the world it went to war in 1898 to free Cuba from Spain. But the moment Spain surrendered, America replaced one empire with another.